So I'm going to start with an awkward disclaimer. I wasn't sure who the audience was going to be in its entirety today. And so I just wanted to mention that this whole process of finding a great new hire is great, but the problem with it is you disqualify dozens of other candidates. And I know some people, might have issues with the political correctness of the process of rejection. I just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm not apologizing for anything that we do as part of this process, but I'm here to offer you new perspectives. I'm not trying to get you to do things my way, and if you don't want to do things my way, I think that's fine. So, Aaron, if you could advance, please. So while the rejecting candidates isn't really ideal, you'll see later that the scientific process, if you use that, it actually helps you avoid any biases. And so I wanted to mention that. Another thing I'd want to mention for background is the same person may be great for one of the jobs in your company, but they may be a complete mismatch for the other. And so the point is, there's a job for everybody. And really what I'm trying to do, and what I would encourage you to do, is make a good match between what your company needs and what the person represents. That's kind of what the art of this process is. One thing I can say for sure, and Brad would chime in, I'm sure, since we work together, but as our organization has grown, diversity in all its forms in all of our team members is a great thing. It's great that we have people from varied backgrounds, and so any political incorrectness that might come from this process, I think is outdone by that. Thanks, Aaron. So this presentation was adopted from one that I did for a group of developmental business leaders. And the format for that was live participation, not virtual. I wish this would be able to be virtual because, I wish it would be able to be live participation because I think it's a better presentation that way. I know when I did it for them, I incorporated a lot of audience participation, and that seemed to make things more interactive. And of course, with this format, you really can't do that as much. An overarching point that I was trying to make with them was not, what I wanted to show them was that my hiring process was really just a scientific experiment, and it utilized the scientific method. And if I was able to prove that to them, then my bigger point was to tell them that all of the things that they should do, they should try to reduce to science. And so I'm not making as big a point over the scientific method today as I did with them, but I will mention it today, and that's just a little background as to why that's so important in there. Thanks, Aaron. So a little bit about me. I'm actually not a human resources person, and when I know I need it, I seek out HR legal advice from the professionals. I'm really more of an operations focused person. What I think I bring more than anything else is I create and maintain processes that make things run smoothly. My nature is when I see problems, I just incline to try to fix them. Okay. Another important point is the process that I'm going to describe today is the process that we do at my company because it matches the culture of our company. Your company's culture might be different, and so for that reason alone, you would want to create your own process. But all I'm trying to do today is give you some ideas on what we do, and you can decide if those things match your culture or if they don't. So, for example, if your company is really big on individual accountability, I would think that you'd want to have a more harsh, critical atmosphere during interviewing, because that's really the atmosphere that the new employee would be working in. And so really what you're trying to do with interviewing is you're trying to put the person in the atmosphere that they're going to be in, and then judge them on how they would behave in that atmosphere. You wouldn't want to make them, you wouldn't want to make the process real easygoing and then have them come into a culture where, you know, accountability was so strong. So the point is, just like if you were hiring somebody that their job was to lift things all day long, you'd want to have them lift as part of the interviewing process to prove that they could, and you're allowed to do that. So the point is, you know, you'd want to try to match you want your interviewing process to, at least in some ways, represent what the work would be like, so that the person knows what they're getting into, and you know how they would behave in that process. Okay, Aaron. So take a minute, if you would, and think about your company's hiring process. I ask you to do this because when I tell you what ours is, I want you to be able to compare, and I want you to think about what is different about what I do, because I think that would be most meaningful for you. So what processes does your company implement? How many steps are there in your process? How many distinct meetings? How many different days? How many different interviews do you have with an individual candidate? Are multiple coworkers part of the vetting process? Are all your company's most dynamic individuals involved? Okay. So if you would, I know you don't, I know you don't know my process, but I want you to just kind of guess based on thinking about what your own company does, but guess how many steps you anticipate that I'll have in my current process. Just write it down on the side of a sheet of paper if you would. And then separately, how many meeting days, how many separate interviews do you think that we'll have in our current process? Okay. So what are the effects of a bad hire? The reason that having such a process that is effective is that parting with people is filled with legal bureaucracy, as we all know, and certainly bad public relations. We all live most of us live in a small town, and I used to make the joke that whenever we had to let somebody go, I'd always hate going to Walmart because I'd always run into them. And so you want to try to make sure that you're not hiring somebody if they're not going to be long lasting. The other part of it is, in order to show somebody that it's not a match, you have to let them have a bunch of time where they aren't being effective, and it just extends the time that is needed to ultimately find the replacement. So it's another subpar part. Obviously, when you have somebody on your team that isn't matching the performance of the other team members that you have, it's not good for company morale. And imagine that if this was a more interactive process, I imagine there'd be some horror stories that many of you would have that you could share. And so the point is, go ahead, Aaron. So why wouldn't you want to establish a process designed to optimize hiring success, Aaron? So what is the objective of a hiring process? I would say it's to identify one candidate that's most likely to succeed. Usually there are multiple candidates, and so there's I can't see the forest for the trees issue that you have to deal with. And I'll show you in my process how we work through that. Most likely to succeed means that you need to vet people against each other and determine which one you think would be a better fit for your circumstance. If the experimentation process for one candidate was different from that of another, how would you be able to trust the results? My process is pretty consistent with one to the other, so that we can, in fact, judge one against the other a little bit better. And then I'll show you how some initial experimentation can help develop a prioritized ranking of the candidates. Okay. So a little bit about scientific method. I'm just going to stop talking now and let you read through these slides. Aaron will progress them, but I just want to give you a little bit of a reminder of what the scientific method is and why it would be beneficial in this process. Super. So how the scientific method can improve hiring outcomes. A dedication to science means never winging it. So whenever scientists start to conduct their experiments, the last thing they want to do is just start doing things at random. They like to be very disciplined in their approach. So I treat every process step as one experiment on a sample audience. And so if I have 3 interviews for every candidate, I'd want every candidate to go through the first interview, and then I'd only then go to the second interview with all the candidates, and then only then go to the third interview with all the candidates. And that's as opposed to taking one from step 1 to step 10 and then going to the next one. It's important that you kind of have something comparable and that you can remember to judge one candidate against the other as you go through the process. Feelings are the last thing that you want to have as a scientist. You want feelings to be replaced by facts. And so I'll show you later on how we have facts and try to avoid feelings. The second to last bullet there is one I wanted to touch on a little bit. It's very easy to fall in love with a certain candidate's resume. Certain people have a great skill at writing resumes, and maybe they're a good writer. And it's easy to fall in love with that, especially when you have other people involved in the process. It's also easy to really find appeal in a smooth talking candidate, and you just have to really, if you don't have things that will help you make good decisions, you'll fall in love and not make good decisions. And so I'll show you how we do that where I work. The last thing on there is, just like any scientific process, anytime you have a failing, if you hire somebody that doesn't work out, always circle back and figure out what went wrong and what you can do different in order to improve the process. Aaron? So if there's any manufacturing people in the audience, you'll recognize a lot of these terms. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is how science is involved in business every day. So failure analysis, when something goes wrong, figure out why it went wrong. Root cause is simply what is the number one thing that happened that caused the failure. And then corrective action, based on what the failure was, what can we do differently going forward? And so we won't see that again. Aaron? The best, and so this is clearly a manufacturing reference, but the best operating companies stop production when they experience a problem resulting in bad product. And Aaron, you can advance. So while stopping production is not ideal, it's much better than continuing to produce bad products. The time that you spend in stopping the production and figuring out the problem and solving the problem has way less negative repercussions than continuing to produce the bad product. Aaron? Okay, break for questions.
If anybody wants to submit their question via the chat box, I'll be watching that too. Just wanted to put that out there.
Seems like we can proceed. Okay, so a minute ago, I asked you to just kind of guess, which is kind of a wild thing to do, but I wanted you to think about your own company's processes and then be able to, when I tell you what my answers are, I wanted you to have a certain feeling one way or the other. So how many steps do you think I'll have in my process? Aaron? I have 10 steps. Next question is, how many meetings do you think we'll have with individual candidates? Aaron? We have no less than 3 individual interviews with every candidate. That means that they get in their car and come to our office on 3 different days. And that's really important because every time that you see somebody from on a different day, they have a different part of their day has happened to them. And so the more times you see them, the more often you have the chance of catching that if you only see them one time, the point is they can kind of fool you more. But if you see them 3 times, it's way less likely that they can fool you because they're a good actor. Aaron? So I didn't ask this of you before, but I wanted to tell you how many hours that I spend. So I don't, if I interview somebody on the first interview and they clearly aren't going to be a good candidate, I don't interview them the second and third time. But if I do interview somebody all the way through, I will go ahead and advance it, Aaron. I spend more than 5.5 hours per candidate on the successful candidate. And so that means I spend some amount of hours, a little bit less than that, on all the candidates. And I just imagine that's probably more than you would have thought. So on the successful candidate, the last step in our process is to have other people involved in. So I'm back on computer. Okay, here are the steps in the process. So the first one is design a captivating job advertisement. I use that dramatic word choice because how you advertise a job, if you advertise a common job, you're going to get common responses. And so it has to be captivating. We'll take a look at what that means later. The second step is to advertise a job in appropriate mediums. Today, online is a great way to do it, particularly if you're going to have a detailed job advertisement. The old days where you put it in the newspaper, you obviously can't have a really long job advertisement because it's very expensive for that. The third step, very important, using referral networks to boost penetration of the ad. What I mean by that is trade organizations, professional organizations. It really depends on what kind of a job you're trying to fill, but getting other organizations to know about the job and then letting them use their own networks to advertise to their constituents is very important. We're going to talk some later about the process that we used in ultimately hiring Chuck. And this number 3 was very important, that we went out to certain organizations that had community development people already in them, and they made a bunch of buzz about the job, and that really, we had hundreds of people that responded to that ad, and so that was very important. The more people you have, the better luck you're going to have in the end. So number 4 is probably where my process starts to differ a little bit from the average. So right in the ad itself, we direct the candidates to online testing. And so right in the ad, it tells them where to go. They go do the testing. And then number 5, the online testing results just naturally create a prioritized ranking of the candidates. I'll show you in a minute the feedback that you get from the online testing. And so imagine having 200 people respond to an ad, and how are you going to pour through all those resumes? Well, the first thing you do is you have a prioritized ranking of the candidates, and that just helps you with your process. Number 6 is resume review. I sit down with every resume that I get for people that I'm interested in, and I take an hour to pour through the resume, develop specific questions for the candidates, and just identify things that I'm concerned about or things that I think are strengths. And so that's an hour for every resume I review, and there really isn't any shortcut to that. Number 7, once I've done the preparation for the interview, I'll call people in. My initial interview is almost always 2 hours. I'll show you on a subsequent slide what the content of that interview is. And so number 8, after I've done initial interviews with all the candidates that I'm interested in, I don't always do reference checks, and there's some shortcomings to reference checks, but I also have gotten some really good feedback, and both good and bad. And so whenever you can, you use reference checks. It's a good process to use. Then I have people come in for a second interview. This is also only with me. It's an hour and a half for each person generally. And after the end of all the interviews, I always re-rank people, because I interview everybody the second time, one after another. And then I remember all that and compare people against each other. The third interview that we have is 1 hour spent with me, and then we get the group involved, and I'll have a subsequent slide that details that and more later. Aaron? So I'll try to whip through this pretty quickly. So here are just some beliefs and methods that I use in the current process. So I already hit on this: consistency of process steps from each candidate. I don't do a step different from one to the other. And so Aaron, if you can go to the multiple steps one, please. So multiple steps, I've already a little bit talked about it, but it's really super important that you see people multiple times. Make them get in their car, drive to your office. The more often you see them on different days, the more likely that they are not going to be able to fool you, because they just can't put up the foolery, over multiple days. It's a trick of the trade. It works really well. You'd be surprised. The first time you see somebody, they'll be dressed in their best. The second time you see them, they'll be dressed a little bit worse. And the third time you see them, they'll be dressed in their jeans. And I'm not suggesting anything by that, but it's all data. What we're looking for in this process is as much data as we can possibly get to make the best decision. Aaron? This is important. Every hire that you have the opportunity to make, if you could hire somebody that's high potential, you'd not only fill the role that you have, but you'd also have somebody available in the future that might be able to do something better than what you're shooting for. This is a very important thing. Intelligence is the prerequisite of potential. The most intelligent people are the ones that have the most potential for the most part. If it's a job that has anything to do with mental capabilities, and it's just so important. And so you'll see in the testing that I'll show you here in a minute how they help us determine how intelligent a person is. One thing that I say that's probably very different than most people is I almost never worry about relevant experience. Where I work now, we basically don't want anybody that has any prior experience in our industry. We want to train them our own way. And the good thing is if you hire intelligent people, you don't have to worry about them being experienced, because they'll learn quickly. And that's just really an important factor there. Aaron? So this is I'm sure this is going to surprise most people. You wouldn't think that this would be the process that I would go through, the phases that I go through. But the first thing that I do when I touch base with people is I'm recruiting them. I want to make them want the company. I want to make them want the job. I'm in sales mode. And so once I get them hooked, then I go into the second phase, which is skepticism. This is the part that I'm sure many of you wouldn't anticipate that I would do or that many others would do, but I want to uncover their weaknesses. I want to call them on the weaknesses that I've covered. I want them to react to my calling them on their weaknesses. I'm going to challenge them. I push them away from the job. I push them away from the job because I want to see the ones that fight their way back into the job. And that's really an important thing that you learn. But then I have to go back to the third phase, which is back to recruiting and attracting. So I go from one thing to the other, good cop, bad cop, good cop, in order to get them to be excited about the job again. Once I've determined that they're suitable after I've been skeptical about them, then I've got to get them back excited about the job again. And so I'm sure that's probably surprising to many of you, and I just wanted to emphasize that. Aaron?
Scott, I'm just going to read something. There's a question.
Okay.
And this says, what reasons do you consider a failed hiring? Just bad fits for the job? Many people leave for more money, better benefits, or more opportunity for advancement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would consider all of those failures. Only for what we do at Rossbacher, we have so much investment in training people that we really have to be careful that we're hiring people for the long term. And so I, of course, have had multiple jobs. Probably everybody here has had multiple jobs. And so it's kind of the nature of the beast. But really, I would consider, depending on the amount of time, I suppose, if somebody was there for 10 years and we had good service out of it, I wouldn't probably consider it much of a failure. But do you want to read that again, Aaron, real quick, and make sure I've hit on all aspects of that?
Sorry, the quote of 2020, you're on mute. What reasons do you consider a failed hiring? Just bad fits for the job? Many people leave for more money, better benefits, or more opportunity for advancement?
Yeah, and that's all true. So I guess it's hard to answer that, but the point I guess I wanted to make is if you're a company like we are, where we're going to train people and invest so much, like for example, our folks have to get licensed, and that's a month-long process, and we pay for all that. And so, but really then what we always say is it takes them a year after they're licensed to get up to speed in what we do. And so then if somebody quits after the 13th month, that's like that'd be the worst thing for us, because we have to go start the 12-month process again. So I guess it's different for every company, but probably the reason why we're so particular where I work is because of that investment we have to make.
And then Scott, there's another question. It says, do candidates often balk at your process?
Surprisingly, they do not. I don't know why they don't, but if they did, it would just be an indication that they wouldn't be a good fit for our culture. And so I wouldn't really mind it. And so I guess it is funny that they don't. I'll tell you some things in a little bit that I didn't realize. I'm reading Chuck's comment here, and I've lost my train of thought. So good job there, Chuck. Yeah, Aaron, can you help me where we were there? I'm sorry.
Yep, no problem. It just said, do candidates often balk at your process? Do you ever feedback from anybody about the process.
It really is surprising to me that they don't, because it isn't, when I call them and tell them that I'm inviting them in for the third time, you would think that they like, well, I have a job, but the ones that want the job, they do what they need to do. And so I guess if they did balk, it would just be more evidence for us that they weren't a good fit, like I said.
And it looks like that's it for the questions in the comments. But if anybody wants to say their question out loud, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Scott yourself. Okay, should I move on?
Sure thing. Thanks, Aaron. So again, here are the steps. I'm not going to go through these again, but I just wanted you to remember what they are. We're going to talk about specific ones here in more detail, and that's why I'm starting with this slide. Go ahead, Aaron. So design a captivating job advertisement. I mentioned earlier, this is huge. You can't find somebody extraordinary unless you have something that attracts extraordinary people. And so, Aaron, if you can show, we're going to show the job advertisement that we used in ultimately landing Chuck, and then we're going to actually go through. So what this, once you show them that it's 2 pages, and don't really just kind of breeze through it really fast. So you can see that there's parts that are highlighted and parts that aren't highlighted. The parts that are highlighted, I think would be what I mean by a captivating advertisement. The parts that are not highlighted, I would maintain are the standard run-of-the-mill job description or job advertisements that you would read. And so I just want to, Aaron, why don't you slowly scroll through and let people essentially read this, read both the unhighlighted and the highlighted, and just, I think if you do it that way, you'll see what makes this ad different than the average ad. I'm going to step away for a second. I'll be right back.
I'm going too fast. Feel free to yell or take screenshots.
Okay, so I'm looking at it on a paper copy here. And so the first thing that we were very bold in saying was that we're willing to pay what you need to be excited about this job. And so obviously you have to have the support of the organization that you're hiring for to do that. But obviously that's going to get people's attention, as opposed to, not saying that. And so having a good reputation as an employer is another thing that will get their attention. The second thing we said there, if you can scroll to the second part real quick, Aaron, the second yellow part, we talk about, so that effective execution in this position. So we basically say, hey, if you come in and do this job well, you'll make such a name for yourself that you'll have a lot of other opportunities later. And so what person that doesn't want to mature in a job would not be excited about that part of it. So then we talk about Impact Corry and how we're reorganized and what the role of the organization is. We talk about the money that we have in economic development budgets, which really is uncommon. And so the point is we just throw things out there that are going to attract the right people. And, you know, instead of just the parts of the typical job ad that would be the not highlighted parts. So we have Chuck here. If we can cue her up, I just want to ask her a couple questions. So Chuck,
Ready to go.
I remember when we talked in our interviews, but give us a couple of examples of what really spoke to you about this job. And I remember at one point you said, "This is my dream role." And so that was I had a couple people tell me that during the interview. And so tell us more, Chuck, just a little bit more color on what you meant by some of those things.
I had my own business. I was a consultant doing this type of work for groups. And I had worked my way up to doing multi-county efforts, like revamping the health sector in 2 counties at once. But nothing was a holistic movement that you could make in one community. You could see your progress. And I remember, Scott, you interviewing me and saying, what does the future look like? Like, what would you see as success? And I thought, sitting on my porch and seeing that other people are carrying the torch. And this ad said to me, it used the language of my work. It showed that there was passion about it rather than just dull facts. And it showed me that I had the potential to move and work with a whole community to make huge progress, rather than I can do a little over here on this edge and a little over here, and we never know if they're going to come together. And also it was a big chance to fail tremendously.
Yeah, and so like I said, when you take this ad and then you show it to all the trade organizations and the professional organizations, and they feel the same way Chuck did, and so then they send it through all their ranks, we really ended up with, like I said, hundreds of candidates for this. That was just unbelievable. We also had local candidates that were really good, and it was just really, the buzz around this was something like I've not really ever seen. And so it's an extreme example for sure. Not every manufacturing company is going to be able to come up with a job ad like this for a manufacturing job. But the point is, I guess I'm just trying to make my point by exaggerating here a little bit, that the more exciting you can get people about the job, the better chances you are going to be to succeed. So Aaron, you can go back to the slide presentation, please.
Can I add one thing? I
Sure.
do think it could work even for the most mundane of jobs, because it told me that there were thinking people behind it who were going to value me, rather than just a process I was going to fit into.
Yeah, you know, where I used to work and learned a lot of this, they used to call that me copy. And I don't even know what that means, but I think when you're writing, and Aaron probably knows because it's a newspaper terminology, but me copy means you're supposed to write the ad telling the person reading it how they're going to benefit, and not talking about the company. And so I always struggle with that, because you have to talk about the company. Frankly, talking about how great the company is part of the appeal, but it's always good to, I always have in the back of my mind to have me copy. And so I guess that was a good point, Chuck. Thanks. So I just want to say one more thing before we move on. So because we're trying to have a captivating ad, the first question I always ask people, and Chuck, you might remember this was the first thing I asked you, what about the job advertisement caused you to want to respond? And so somebody will say, oh, 120,000, that's why I want to respond. But Chuck didn't care about that. She talked about 10 other things that were important to her. And so what response do you think I would be more happy to have received? One that has 10 different layers to it, or one that just says they're interested in the money? So anyway, thanks. Onward there, Aaron. So I mentioned that the online testing really helps in prioritizing things, and Aaron's going to show you in a minute what the testing results look like, and you can see how valuable that would be in comparing one person against the other. So why don't we just scroll through it kind of quickly here. So it's called One Score from Wonderlic. Wonderlic is a group that I've used for intelligence testing for many, many years. And so the overall score is a 1 score, and this person here got a 55 overall. And so the 1 score is a combination of 3 different scores. It's cognitive ability, and this person got a 40 on cognitive. Motivation is the second category that they judge people on, and this person got a 66. So he's doing better in motivation than he was in cognitive. And then look at personality. This person's personality match is a good one for the job, 89 compared to the other lower scores. And so keep scrolling through there if you would, Aaron. So now here's cognitive, a little bit more detail on cognitive. I'll spend a little bit of time on this and let you kind of read it, but it just talks about, and show the bell curve, I guess, Aaron, if you would. So this person, like it says here, scored better than only 39% of the typical applicant pool for this job. So really, it's on the wrong side of the bell curve from a cognitive standpoint. Motivation, you can read the individual categories that they measure here. This person got a 76 in enterprising. You can read that briefly to yourself. Traditional, they got a little bit lower score. You can read what that means. Okay. Supportive interests. And then it talks about not relevant motivators. There's other measurements that there's a total of, I think, 5 or 6 things that they measure you on, but in some particular jobs, that other things aren't as important as, some things aren't as important as others, and so they call those not relevant motivators. So anyway, I don't get as much out of the second and third parts of this as I do the cognitive, but it's all good information. And what this really does is it warns you about certain things that people might be because of what their score is, and then you can develop questions to ask them to prove it one way or another. And so we'll just quickly go through the personality part here. You can see that they're, obviously they did much better, 89 in dependability. You can scroll through some more here. 42 in stress tolerance. Cooperation, they're very helpful, 100. So obviously this person is not difficult to get along with. They're very helpful. Sociable, they're extroverted compared to being introverted, pretty strongly so. And then open-mindedness, they're in the middle between narrow-minded and curious. Okay, Aaron. Super, we can go back to the main presentation now. So resume review is the next part of the process I wanted to give a little bit more details on. When I'm looking at a resume, I'm looking for technical proficiency. I want to find out how much time they have at each job. I the first thing I do is calculate the number of years that they are at every job. And if I see a pattern of 2 years here, 2 years there, 2 years here, 2 years there, obviously that's something that I'm going to be concerned about and want to ask some more questions. I look for gaps in employment. If there's a working mother type situation, then that's an explainable gap, but I always want to ask them why there are gaps and understand that better. Writing skills is huge. However, if people have typos in their resume, that they're going to have typos in the communication they have with your customers. And so everybody knows that when they're doing a resume, they're supposed to, have it be perfect. And the folks that don't have it be perfect, it's a big message for you. Social media review these days is a great tool. People expose a lot of things about themselves on social media, and it's right there for you to see. And we've learned a lot about a lot of people, and good things and bad things. And so I think that's definitely needs to be part of your process. And so I do that when I'm reviewing the resume. And so what I do is I write out interview questions that are candidate specific based on their resume review. Aaron? So this, I'm just making a point out of this because it really makes my point. Every little interaction you have with a candidate is gold, and you should use it for that. Even a simple invitation to an interview, I typically send those via email, and I can't wait to see how quickly they respond, how enthusiastic they are when they respond. What kind of skills do they have when they write emails? Because that's what they're going to communicate with our customers that way. And so are they less formal in emailing? And so another thing I look for is somebody that has a confirming nature. So I'll say, hey, meet me at 8:30 in my office. And they'll say, okay, yeah, that's 8:30 at 19 North Center Street. And I just think that's a nice feature that some people have that I like to see. But my point is, you learn a lot about people with every little interaction you have with them. Aaron? So interview questions. Interviews are always in person. And obviously today, with all the pandemic issues, that's limited some, but it's always better to be in person. I want to see somebody's face. I want to see what how much eye contact they have, etc. The goal of interviewing is to expose the real person. They're going to try to fool you, and you're going to try to expose who they really are. That's the game that goes on. Very carefully worded questions is the key. You never want to ask somebody a question that they can answer with yes or no. You always want to say, tell me about a time that you weren't getting along with a coworker. What did you do? And so just stop talking and let them talk. And in fact, that's the next point there is the interviewer should talk 20% of the time, and the interviewee should talk 80% of the time. You just have to ask a question and be quiet and just let them answer. And when you think they're done answering, just keep being quiet to see if they say more. And so the next bullet point there is I'll ask them a question and they'll give me an answer, and I'll say, oh, why is that? And then they'll explain why that is. And then I'll say, well, why is that? And then they'll answer that. So I just keep going, why, until I get to, the real heart of the moment there. Abstract questions are something, depending on who your candidate is. I like to ask really abstract questions just to see how they think on their feet and how deep they are. That's a very good tool as well. Next slide. So in the initial interview, I've already reviewed their resume. I know how long they were at every job. And so I want to find out why they left every job. Why did you leave this job? Oh, okay, you weren't happy with the pay. Okay, well, tell me why else did you leave the job? And believe me, they'll tell you 3 or 4 things, and it's always good information that they tell you. I always ask them why they want to leave their current job. If they're currently employed, why do they want to leave that? And that's in the same way, it's very good information. Another thing that might surprise people is I always find out their salary history. For every job that they're at, I ask them how much money they made at that job. Some of you might think that's off limits. You're not supposed to ask those questions. Maybe you aren't, but I always do, and they always answer. So it's a fine thing. The way that we do it is we like to pay people as a function of what their past pay is. We figure they want to make more money to come work for us than what they're making now. But I always want to know what their salary history is. And so the way I ask that question is I say, I'm going to ask you some questions about your salary history. And if we decide we want to hire you, I want you to show me your W-2s or your not tax returns, your W-2s or your pay stubs to prove that in fact was the case. And so I say that because that way they know they can't lie to me and tell me something different, because they know I'm going to ask them in the end to prove what their salary really is. And so that's the way that I ask that. Progression through the ranks is very important to, I want to ask them questions that, help me understand how they progress through the ranks. And obviously I want to clarify what their duties have been at each job. And what my objective is to find out where they are lacking compared to what we are looking for in our job. Okay. Reference checks are, as I mentioned, I don't do it. I probably only do reference checks about 20% of the time, and probably about 80% of the time that I do them, they're very valuable one way or the other. The last time I did one, I sent an email to a friend of mine who works at a company where this person that I was considering used to work. And I just said, hey, what do you think about so-and-so? And their answer back was run and hide. And so that was a very good feedback that I got from them. Of course, I talked to them and got more details, but the point is, when somebody that you know and respect doesn't have anything good to say about somebody, that's important, and you want to take that into consideration. I almost never would reach out to the people that the candidate provides as a reference. Instead, I would always find my own references. Why wouldn't they put their former boss as a reference? And so if I know their former boss, I'm going to talk to their former boss and find out what I can find out. Obviously, you can do web searches and so forth to find other sources for references. Next. In the second interview, of course, any reference checking would have been done before that, so I might have some questions that I developed from my reference checking. But the second interview is a little bit different. I'm not asking them about their past. I want them to tell me how they're going to be successful with us. And so some sample questions I would ask in the second interview would be, so what are the ways you would address our manufacturing yield issues? What steps would you take to improve our morale? So I ask them a question like that, and I let them answer, and they don't know what it's like in my company, but if they've solved yield problems at their old company, they're going to tell me how they did that. And so I just want to let them prove to me that they can give me the details that make me feel comfortable that they know what they're talking about, and they're not just telling me what they think I want to hear. And so putting substance to it is what I'm really after in the second interview. Another thing I always do, and this is gold as well, I always ask them to tell me how they prepared for the interview and what research they did on the company. And so half of them say, what are you talking about? I didn't do any research on the company. And then the other half say, oh yeah, I was on the website. I talked to 3 people who used to work here. I talked to people that I know your suppliers to, and so the people that come back with a real substantive answer have just put themselves as a top candidate because of that's how they're going to behave in the job. They're going to work hard and do things like that, as opposed to just showing up at the interview and winging it. Next slide. So the third interview is once I've really whittled down the field, we bring the coworker leaders into the third interview. And so with the coworker leaders of mine, I hold a meeting with them to summarize what I've found about a candidate, and then I ask them to validate the way, what I've found about a candidate. Do you agree with what I found, or do you see it differently? So we have probably a half an hour, 45-minute meeting just to talk about that and get them kind of prepared for their part of the interviewing. And then they go and interview the candidate, usually a half an hour probably for each person. The last time we did this, we had 5 people interview a person that came in for the third interview. And we've really had good luck with this. It's really a good way to make sure that everybody is consistently thinking the same about the person. It also is good. It's a good way to, once somebody has interviewed somebody like this, it's a good way to make sure that they're really in tune with the long training process that will ensue. And so, Aaron, you can advance the slide. Here are some of the benefits in getting company leaders involved. And this is, again, this is something that we really have only been doing more recently, and I really think it's an important part of the process. Obviously, the more eyes on the candidate, the better. The interviewer, like I said, gets a sense of what it would be like working next to this candidate. They're the ones that are going to have to train the person, not me. And so it's important that they kind of buy into the candidate based on their own assessment. The other great thing that happens is the interviewee can get a sense of what it would be like working in the company because they've met with so many of the company leaders. And so if you have dynamic people that are meeting with these candidates, the candidate's going to be excited because they are going to feel challenged working here, and that they can feel good about that notion. The other important thing is, I mentioned about being a bad cop earlier, and so it's natural that these other folks that I get involved aren't at all bad cops. In fact, they probably are too good at cops. But the good part about that is that they overcome any lingering bad dynamic that the candidate might have of me being a bad cop, because now they see that there's all these good people involved in the company. And again, with the group involved in the decision-making process, I just think that they're more invested in the candidate, and it's a long training process, and they're the ones that are going to have to do it. And it just seems to work better. It seems to bring everything together better. Aaron? All right, I've obviously been trying to speed things up here. I apologize, but does anyone have any questions from the last time?
I don't see anything in the chat box, but again, everybody feel free to unmute if you want to ask a question aloud. Oh, hang on. I think there's one.
My husband was wondering, what website do you advertise on?
It depends on what the job is. ZipRecruiter is one that I've used for Rossbacker, and it's also one that we used in recruiting for Chuck. It works pretty well. The one thing about advertising on websites is you get people from all over the world, and of course, if you're not wanting to pay relocation, then that doesn't really work as well. But also, like with Chuck, for example, there were some websites that were associated with her trade organization. And so we ended up probably on 3 or 4 different websites, but the ZipRecruiter one was the one that was the most responses were from. And I'm sure you've all probably heard of ZipRecruiter before.
Scott, I have a message that's come in the box, and it says, has any candidate you hired ever surprised you with how good they are?
Yeah, I think I understand the nature of the question. We are positively surprised a lot. And I think I would call it intelligence is important as a predictor of potential, but then potential is something you really don't know until you are working with somebody. And actually, this actually goes right into some of my next slides. Why don't we move forward in the slides, Aaron, and we'll kind of answer that question in a different way. Before I answer that question fully, I'll just get at this slide here. So obviously the most of what I've talked about is when we're really hiring the high level people and you really want to do a super job. If you're trying to hire lower level people, I always try to be scientific with the process, but I do probably move faster through it. I might not spend 2 hours in the first interview, so on and so forth. I don't take shortcuts in the process, but I kind of maybe speed things up a little bit, I guess. Obviously with lower level hires, just getting along with their coworkers is a huge factor. And so I'd always be inclined to really be focused on that, both in the personality testing and with the questions I ask. I always would ask them how, give me examples of when you weren't getting along with your coworkers and, so forth. And so in my organization, I make this joke a lot internally. The person that performs their duties, so everybody in my organization has individual duties. I have the things that I do, Brad has the things that he does. And, we have people that are receptionists and, all kind of, sales people and so on and so forth. But anyway, in my organization, the person that does their job the best just happens to be somebody with very basic duties. And so my point is just there's a role for everybody. And it's a great thing when you make somebody happy because they're happy in their role and they perform super. And it's just really a good thing. And this whole scientific process kind of helps you make with the matchmaking part of that. Aaron, you can advance. So back to the question a minute ago, has anyone ever surprised me in how good they were after I've been through the process? I've been surprised negatively a lot, unfortunately. But not a whole lot lately. I think we've really got the thing refined a little bit better. But the whole thing about hiring people with potential is hiring them is the easy part. The harder part is optimizing their talent and optimizing their reaching their potential, helping them reach their potential. And so the last bullet there is the one that I want to emphasize. And it's really one of the things that I like best about my job is, so my job is to find the talent, but it's also to optimize it. And the way to do that is to work together with them. So it's particularly with a younger person, their minds tell them what's right, but they just don't know how to execute it. And spending time with them, letting them see how you do things and working through it together. And so on the one hand, I'm really critical of things that need to be done better, and they know that. But on the other hand, they see me helping them do it better. And it's just a wonderful thing, and it helps develop potential really well. It's one of the things, like I said, that makes me really excited about what I do. And so what the characterization I've used, and a lot of you've probably heard it, but spending time on the operation together, working through problems together is way more valuable than me just spending time in the operation alone. And so I guess it's kind of a circuitous answer to the question. we hire people and we hope that we hire people with potential, but the work is really to work with them and recognize that potential. Aaron? So that's it. I apologize, folks. It went a little longer than I thought, and I guess the distraction in the middle didn't help. But if anyone has any interest in open discussion, I guess I'd be interested in hearing what stood out the most about this. What was most surprising to you? If there's one element that you're going to incorporate, I'd be interested to hear what that was and why.
Hey, Scott. I had a question in regards to, like, is there like a scientific method to matching up the person, like what skill set you're looking for the job, matching that up?
Yeah, actually, Jason, if you notice, I guess, Aaron, if you could go back to the testing results, I'll point out to Jason one way that we do that. So go to the very top if you would. So Jason, if you can see this, I don't know if you can, but this particular job is so Bill Smith is the applicant, which was just a fake person that I did just to show you this results. But the job that he applied for was chief executive. And so we all know what the typical role of a chief executive would be. And so Wonderlic, when they score these results, they measure it against chief executives. And so when this guy got a 55 on his cognitive, he got a 55 compared against other people who are chief executives. And so the point is, you can have one of these for a file clerk if you wanted, and the things that were important to be a good file clerk are way different than the things that are important to be a chief executive. And this tool actually helps me. So if I was doing a file clerk, Aaron, go to the top again if you would. Instead of saying chief executive there, right under Bill Smith's name, it would say file clerk, and the parameters would be way different. And so it's not perfect, but it is quite varied. And Aaron, you can scroll down a little bit into cognitive ability, and it talks about, keep scrolling a little bit more if you would. So here, I guess maybe keep going a little bit more. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, we were in, I meant motivation. Keep going. You're right, Aaron. So here it says top motivators, and I'll keep going, and it'll say non-relevant motivators. Keep going a little bit more. Yeah, not relevant motivators. And so for chief executives, and this is a great example, read what it says about practical interest. Individuals with a low level of practical interest are generally not motivated by physically demanding jobs that require working with their hands. And so chief executives aren't out there cleaning the streets, and so they don't have to grade very high in practical interest because it's not relevant for them. And so anyway, that was kind of a roundabout answer to your question. Jason, do you want to ask a follow-up, or did I at least somewhat answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was looking for. I guess I didn't realize when I initially saw this, I didn't realize there was a skill set input, I guess, that you're looking for on this report.
Yeah, it's really a very important part of the process. When I did the regional leadership class, they all took this test, and then I had them tell me what their individual jobs were, and that's where I made sure that they got the results that were based on what their jobs were, or what their jobs that they were aspiring to were. And so that was interesting, but it was way different results. You know, the same person's score would be much different if file clerk was what the job was instead of CEO.
Thank you.
Sure, Jason.
Scott, there is a question that just came in from the chat box. The question is, do you find Wonderlic a good tool for lower level positions?
Absolutely. I'll answer that in a little bit of an indirect way. I always want to know what the Wonderlic is, particularly what the cognitive score is. But there are legitimately important jobs that I don't want to have somebody that's super smart in. I want somebody that either cares about customers or that they just want to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, and that's what makes them happy. So I always want to know. I don't always make it an important factor in people's hiring process, but generally, if I have a couple of candidates that I like the same and one has a higher Wonderlic cognitive than the other, I would probably incline towards the higher one. And I'd be happy to answer that further if someone had more questions there.
Anybody?
Aaron, are you having computer issues?
Oh, no, I was just waiting. I didn't want to interrupt anybody, but oh, hang on. It did pop up. Sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, this is a comment from Brad. Thankfully, I was hired before Scott implemented this HR process.
That's what everybody says.
Brad wouldn't have made the cut, would you, Brad? I'm just kidding. Chuck, I don't know how I made it.
No, it's a great process because when the facts all point in the same direction, it just really gives you a lot more confidence in what you're doing. So in Chuck's example, her results were obvious, and here we are benefiting from all that.
Okay, I just looked through the box and I didn't miss any questions. So if anybody else wants to ask one, write to Scott, feel free. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, and another thing is obviously, I'm obviously happy to help out later on. If you have individual questions, you know where to find me, and I'd be happy to help.
Scott, we have one last one, well, last minute one that came in. It says, what position was the most successful you ever hired?
I guess I would have to say Chuck's position, frankly, because it was such a unique situation. I wasn't involved with Impact Corry. I had to come in and really take a group of people. So at Rossbacher, you know, I just do my thing, and I bring people involved in it at the appropriate time, and then we make a group decision. But with Impact Corry, I had to sell everybody on the process. I had to sell them on what they were looking for, because there were so many people that were going to be making the decision. We had to agree in advance what we were looking for, so that when we found somebody that met that, we knew it was a good candidate. And it was just a lot more challenging from the standpoint of being a group. And it was a group that I didn't have any particular, you know, they didn't really know me and didn't know of the process. And so then when we had so many candidates, I'd never been part of anything quite like that. And it was, you know, it's nonprofit, and I'd never done anything with nonprofit before. So maybe your question was a different one, but that was the one that was most rewarding for me, for sure. And I've had I hired people in India one time. That was kind of fun and different, but and I guess rewarding. Of course, I don't work there anymore, so it's not as rewarding as I think about it now, but maybe that has something to do with it. But, you know, I'll tell you, one of the things that I really benefit from too is, even when you have somebody that is not being successful in one job in your company, but you're able to match them up to a different job in the company, and they really shine. And the story I told you a minute ago about the person that does their job better than anybody else at our company had failed in other jobs in our company. And now she's the best at her job in the role that she's in now. And so that's very rewarding as well.
And a big part of reward, Scott, is that you said you weren't involved in Impact Corry, and now you're our secretary treasurer.
Yeah. Yeah, I sucked right in for sure.
Yay!
Any other questions, folks? I really appreciate everybody's attendance and enthusiasm. Like I said, I'm happy to help out as I can in the future as well. Just let me know.
I just want to take a minute to remind everyone that our next third Thursday is going to be Thursday, October 15th. And again, it's going to be at 6 p.m. via Zoom. Information about the guest speaker and the topic will be distributed shortly. So hopefully everybody can join us in another month for that. So if there's no last minute questions, thank you, Scott, for participating. Fantastic presentation. And everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
See you guys. Thank you.